You're tuned into the Writing Community Chat Show, the live streaming YouTube podcast that brings you the stories of authors, screenwriters, and more. Indie or established, this show's for the community, and we invite you to be a part of it. Head to the writingcommunitychatshow.com for more info. The WCCS. Together as one, we get it done.
Hello and welcome to the Writing Community Chat Show. Hello everybody and welcome to this week's Writing Community Chat Show. It is awesome to be here on Friday. You know I love to get into Friday. Anna, thank you so much for your happy Friday message. It is indeed a happy Friday. We've got a great guest on tonight, and as you've noticed, I'm sat currently on my own. Mr. Hooley is being traditionally late, but that's all right. I've got a few things I can chat about before we get our guest on. One of the things is actually spooky season is arriving, Halloween, the month of October, which means a lot of horror books come out, a lot of horror movies come out, which is a great time for me. I love the horror. So I'd like to know your suggestions. Have you got books that you love to read in horror in October? Maybe you've read it over and over. Maybe it's something new you've discovered and getting into. Please let us know what you're getting into through the month of October. I've been seeing a lot of clips lately of the new Alien film, which I've actually seen, and it's brought up some old clips of Alien as well. I'm talking about the movie Alien from the 70s and Aliens into the 80s as well. Movies that I consider absolutely incredible, that still hold great imagery and value to this day. And I was thinking about why I write so many female characters in my stories. Mostly my main characters are always females. And I was looking back at this when I was looking at the clips earlier, and I really think it's down to characters like Ripley from the Alien franchise and people like that are female lead characters. And again, going back into movies in those days wasn't often the case, but I love that series so much that perhaps those are the reasons why I'm finding those inspirations. And maybe there's something you haven't learned about your writing until recently, like I have today. So I'd be interested to know, is there anything that you guys are writing more often than not and haven't realized why you're doing that? And that's kind of interesting. This show is always bringing out conversations about how authors have got to where they are now. So that's an interesting topic I've never really brought up before, as why people write certain things that they do write. So very interested to know people's opinions on that. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, definitely. It isn't something people have brought up before, and I know people have had discussions with other people about whether or not people should read, or male authors should write female characters and vice versa. I don't think it's a problem. There's a lot of people that agreed in those posts that it's not a problem. It's just very interesting that was my take and my kind of natural writing. But there you go. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get our guest on, and if Chris does pop into the chat like he should do, I'll just pop him on as well so he can be late. So I'll introduce the guest. Tonight we have, we're thrilled to have you here as always, and we have a special live interview with an author whose work delves deep into the eerie, the mysterious, and the supernatural. Lorna has spent 15 years and also in content development and editorial roles before pursuing her lifelong dream of writing fiction. Her latest novel, A Glimmer in the Hallows, which you can see up in the top corner there, and I will jump. You see it. It's all okay. Chris, I'm going to stop that introduction very quickly. Hi.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, mate. I was in the midst of writing again like I was last week. Only this time I did actually miss the start of the show.
Do you know how I knew you were doing that?
Because I sent the Substack out.
I got an email saying Christopher Hooley's just posted on Substack. I was thinking, you were supposed to be on the show, my man. It's all
yeah,
okay.
I'm so sorry.
It's understandable. Don't worry. I was just chatting about a few things before. I'll catch you up later. It's all good stuff. And I was introducing the guest, but I just stopped it very quickly to ask, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. And at least you can see that I'm writing. Yes. That's the thing. Yeah, so I'm sorry about that. But yeah, I get that sort of like little window between putting the kids to bed and then setting up. So I set up and then I was like, I'm nearly finished. I'll just go on and edit it. And then like that was like 20 minutes. And I was like, oh shit. I didn't even look at the time that I posted that.
It was about a minute ago, which would have been 3 or 4 minutes past 8. But never mind.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
Oh, don't be sorry.
I'm looking forward to tonight. I'm looking forward to chatting to the guest.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a great show.
Yeah, the reason I'm definitely not annoyed that you're late. I'm not. I'm just saying that I'm definitely not, because the writing you're doing is very inspiring and really intriguing at the moment. So if you're on Substack, please go and check out Chris Hooley's latest posts. You've done quite a lot recently about positivity and writing and things, and it's really good to read. So I'm recommending Mr. Hooley's Substack, not just because he's my co-host and the chat show host and part of this community, but because it's genuinely good content. So go and check it out, please. Okay, so let me get back to the introduction and get our guest on, Chris, because I stopped right in the middle and I shouldn't have, but there you go.
All right.
So tonight we are thrilled to have you here for this special live interview with an author whose work delves deep into the eerie, the mysterious, and the supernatural. Lorna has spent over 15 years in content development and editorial roles. That's the second time I messed that up. Before pursuing her lifelong dream of writing fiction. Her latest novel, A Glimmer in the Hollows, which is above Chris's head there, is a mesmerizing blend of mystery, sci-fi, and romance, all woven together with supernatural intrigue. And she has a gift for creating tense, atmospheric narratives that challenge the boundaries between reality and the unknown. So today we'll be talking all about her writing journey, the inspiration behind A Glimmer in the Hollows, and how she crafts such compelling, multi-layered stories. So without further ado, please welcome to the show, Lorna Selley. Hello, Lorna.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
You are very, very welcome. I love I haven't read your book yet. The cover is fantastic. The blurb is fantastic. So we're hoping to get a lot of information from you about this book that is coming out at the end of this month. So before we get into all of that, how is Lorna doing?
I'm doing great, thank you. I'm very happy that we managed to dodge the Hurricane Helene that came through. I live in Georgia, but very sad for the people who, were affected by it. But wow, that was close.
Yeah. One of our, we've got a couple of American followers on the show that have been supporting us for a long, long time. And one of them I was chatting with this week was literally about 30 miles on the safety side. You know what I mean? So we are very, very grateful for those that did avoid that. And it is very sad for those that got really stuck into it. And hopefully things are speedy recoveries and, people can get back on their feet. But, it's a terrible thing. And we're just lucky that a lot of people have missed it. But there you go. Yeah. Not so bad in the UK. It's been a bit wet, but that's typically what we get. It was really funny, not funny, but kind of ironic that on the news they were showing floods in the UK, which were like little streams running down the river, and then you look online and see what was happening in America, and it's just like, why are we showing this on the news? I know it's affecting people, but it's not in comparison.
Well, I know, but you guys are just around the corner from some pretty intense cold, I think, right around this time of year. It's just starting to get like pretty grey and dismal, and you've got a lot of that ahead. I've
got the jumper on, and I've seen a few people talking about putting the heating on already, which I am not doing just yet. No chance. Yeah. So, I mean, being in America as a writer, you've got a history in the writing world anyway, but have you connected as a fiction writer in your local area?
Well, it's been a bit of a challenge because of moving around so much. I mean, I've lived in 9 countries, and just in 3 years ago, I moved back to the States after a move away from it. And since then, we've been living in 2 different places in Florida, and then moving to Virginia, to Georgia. So it's been a challenge. I'm just starting to connect with book clubs right now, talking to a few small bookshops, trying to get myself kind of situated in the community. But that has definitely been a challenge.
Yeah. Interesting then. 9 different countries, a lot of culture there. That a lot of that is gone into your work, I'm sure. Any particular country that you lived in, have you had a good connection with writers there, or has it always kind of been like you're just getting on with work and not really pushing yourself into the community in that sense?
Yeah, it's always been a matter of writing was always very much a sort of retreat for me, a sort of mental retreat from the some of the stresses of expat life, so not so much. I think this is really the first time, especially since I'm very close to the Appalachian Mountains now, this is really the first time where I feel that kind of connection to my writing.
Wow, that's really inspiring. I mean, having beauty on your doorstep is amazing, but going being able to see things like mountains, and it just must breed so much creativity and just different thought patterns that most people don't get to kind of experience, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, definitely very fortunate in that regard. I think Appalachia, or Appalachia as they like to call it, is this sort of interesting mix of exceptional natural beauty and this kind of fear-inducing unknown with many, many layers of myth and legend sort of haunting the place. So I think it's a big source of inspiration, especially for writers who want to kind of tap into the sort of unsettling mystery of the place.
Yeah, and of course that features in your novel, which we'll speak about later. Chris, were you going to ask something there? I'm just not rambling, but I'm very interested to talk.
Yeah, I've been formulating a question whilst obviously been listening. I'm being very conscious not to go because I've listened back to the podcast, and I do that quite a bit, and it's really irritating to listen to. So I've tried to stop doing that. But my question is, what do you think you're searching for, having lived in 9 different countries? And is that any different what you're searching for in the solitary process of being a writer?
I mean, that's a really good question. I honestly, to be totally honest, I think a lot of the earlier moves were simply for work, for building a solid kind of financial foundation for life, because I hated the idea of being broke, but I'd also chosen a path that traditionally didn't pay very much. I have a background in languages and linguistics, and I often had to just travel to wherever work was. So I think, and this, whereas coming back here, it very much feels like home, almost as if I've always kind of been here. I always joke that I've obviously had a lot of previous lives in this part of the world, because it feels very familiar to me, even though I wasn't born here. So yeah, I don't know what I was really searching for. I think just a sense of place, a sense of somewhere where you can build roots, where things are both sort of fascinating and intriguing, but comforting enough to feel like home. And I think that can be a real struggle to sort of, when you're younger in life. I think the kind of wild surprises of travel and a lot of the challenges are really sort of interesting and fun, but the older you get, the more you want to just be somewhere comfortable and stable. So I think that's kind of been my traveling journey. With writing, it's very much about exploring, maybe like travel, what the boundary is between what we know and what we don't know. So what is real and what isn't. And I think that's why I've explored the sci-fi and mystery genre more than anything else, is because that's something that fascinates me. Sorry, that was probably quite a rambling answer.
No, it was a good answer. And I like the use there, especially when you're talking about different places and how you get those kind of tales and history and the myths that surround these places. Has there been anything that has surprised you in that sense? I know we're approaching Halloween and spooky seasons here, so have you got any stories about places you've lived or stayed that have got a story that kind of really gripped you?
So I spent about 4 years living in Saudi Arabia, which was fascinating for many reasons. I think what fascinated me there was that despite the sort of very strict religious nature of the place, people also still widely believe in jinns there, in what we would call genies. So often if strange things happened or unfortunate things happened, it was often blamed on them. And that was something that was really, really fascinating to me, because that's not something I was expecting at all.
That is really kind of amazing, isn't it? Really
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so going back then, if you rewind the tape a little, when did something in the writing world become something in your life? I mean, you worked in editing and in the book world before becoming a writer. So was that always the plan, or was there always kind of an inkling that you would become a writer as well?
I think I really started exploring writing about 11 years ago, when I was very much in a transition. The economy here was still very, very bad, and I was waiting for my visa to move overseas, and I was in this kind of limbo phase, and I realized, okay, now is the time to do something that I've always wanted to do, because I've literally got nothing else to do. But more interestingly, I think, so while living in Switzerland, another place I've lived, I was recovering from chronic illness, and I was suffering from some really extreme wild insomnia, and the medication I was taking to treat that was creating incredibly vivid, strange dreams. And a lot of the book, that's when I started writing A Glimmer in the Hollows, and a lot of the book is the characters questioning whether or not the thing that happened the night before is actually something they can reliably know to be true, or if they were dreaming. So, and I often felt like I was in this kind of fugue state because of these strange side effects. And I think those sort of two worlds collided for me. My world and the world I built in fiction kind of blurred a little bit at times, at 3 or 4 in the morning, when you're just completely delirious and desperately tired but can't sleep, and you're kind of scribbling down ideas to write because it's basically the only thing you can do.
Yeah. That's amazing. Vivid dreams, when I have them, I love having this sort of crazy dreams that I remember. But was any of the dreams that you had actually something you used in your work? Do you remember at all?
Yes, I mean, I do remember. It's hard. It's sort of a chicken and the egg question, because, I built this in my head. I built this entire fictional town, and I started dreaming about that town, and then that informed the world I was building, and it's sort of this snowballing effect. And so you kind of lose track of what you've invented on which side of sleep. You know what I mean? Yeah,
definitely.
Lorna, I'm really interested in the fact that you've moved around so many different places, and you're starting again. Essentially in each different place. How similar is that process of starting again somewhere new to starting a novel for the first time, or a story? And what's the process like there in both situations?
I think it's very similar in many ways. I mean, you're sort of plunged into an empty canvas in both situations, because in both situations you don't yet know anybody. You don't really know what you're going to be doing every day until you figure that out. You don't know how to get around, and it's exactly the same as building a world in your book. I always say I have to develop my characters first, because until I know my characters, I don't know what they're going to be doing for the next 300 pages, because their thoughts and the way their minds work informs what they do every day. And that's very similar to moving around, in that you really have to start from scratch, figuring out, okay, who are the people around me? What are the customs? How am I going to fit into all of this? So yeah, I mean, there's definitely similarities there for sure.
Does that mean then, taken from what you just said, that you're a plotter?
Oh God, I don't know. You see, I build these sort of long, elaborate, pretty outlines that I then sort of stick to for a few chapters and then completely ignore, and then I'll write 6 more chapters and then I'll re-outline, and then so it's sort of this evolving mix of plotting and pantsing. Yeah.
Which is kind of a good way to go, because I think if you're just strictly one or the other, if you're strictly a plotter, you lose sight of that kind of creative process your mind takes you on. And if you're strictly a pantster, you lose potentially the avenues of thinking things out strategically. So I think having the mix is a really sort of valuable asset.
Yeah, for sure. It is. I mean, I would love to be one of these incredibly logical, rational people who can do things in this sort of linear way. And I think maybe that's easier if you write genre fiction that is quite formulaic, and there's nothing wrong with that. You know, I know it sometimes all you want is like a reliable plot. So I think if you're writing something where there's a very clear formula with clear expectations, then that it's a little easier. But when you're blending multiple genres and kind of experimenting a bit, I think it gets tricky very quickly, especially on your first novel, when you don't really know what you're doing until you're about halfway through, and then you know you're going to write another draft anyway.
So am I right in saying that you were a part of Suzanne Kingsbury's Gateless program, right?
Yeah.
So can you talk to us a bit about that then? Because it's something that I'm not very familiar with, and I'd love to know kind of how that helped you as a writer, and if there's any tips that you learned that could help the community as well.
I think Suzanne is the perfect person to work with if you're struggling with confidence and believing in yourself. Suzanne will force you to believe in yourself as a writer, and she will get you out of the paralysis of doubting every single thing that you write. She focuses heavily on that. If you're wanting to be given like a formula on how to write a horror a horror novel, or how to write science fiction, she's not your person, because her approach is much more sort of fluid than that, and she's really there to tease out of you what's already inside, rather than there to instruct you on exactly how to do something. Her courses are extremely collaborative and extremely supportive. So if you need a support group, you need a support network of like-minded writers who are also sort of going through something similar, then yeah, I think she's the perfect choice.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Just to build on that, this may sound like a bit of a sort of negative question about the whole concept, but is it because you're getting that support and that feel-good sort of experience that encourage you to write more? And do you think if you hadn't had that experience, you'd have found your way to where you are now anyway? Or do you think you would have given up writing because you wouldn't have had that encouragement and that sort of belief instilled in you by somebody else? Because the way you're describing it sounds very much like a personal trainer. Like, yes, you could go to the gym by yourself, you could lose weight, you could work out, you could do all those things. But having somebody else there is probably more likely to happen, and therefore you're more likely to be successful. Is that kind of how it worked? Or?
Exactly, yeah. And I mean, you know, I was also battling, like I said, sort of some pretty severe symptoms from being sick, and I just arrived in Switzerland, didn't know anybody. So it was the thought of trying to get a novel done in the middle of all of that. I think I probably would have done it, but it would have taken me a lot longer, and I would have battled with myself a lot more, for sure.
Was that so? What they did then? Did they sort of remove that internal dialogue in your mind of doubt and replace it with a new one?
What she did is, instead of, so often, you know, when you're part of these like critique circles and groups and stuff, they can be incredibly useful to find out what's wrong with your writing. Sometimes they're less effective at finding out about what's right about your writing. So what Suzanne tries to focus on is teasing out of you what is good about your writing and what people really enjoy. And I think you need a balance of that. You know, you need critical feedback. You need to develop a thick skin. You need to get used to people saying, "Oh, I hated that," because that's what's going to happen, right? But I think sometimes we feel like we have to torture ourselves with that, and we forget that we also need to hear from people. This here is exactly what you're doing right, and you need to do more of it, and you need to believe in yourself because this is really good.
I want to take you back, because I did have a question before we started talking about that. Now I've had several more, obviously, as a result of you talking, but I wanted to take you back to the D&D, in my opinion. So, firstly, what is your opinion on dreams and dreaming in general? Because I think that's quite an interesting concept to explore. And also, what does a day in the life of yourself look like?
Dreams. I mean, I don't know. I find dreams to be so. What really fascinates me about dreams is that often they seem to exist outside of time and the human consciousness. Our conscious mind's perception of time and space. So I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but while you're dreaming, often your dream will predict something that's about to happen. So just before you wake up, you will dream that something is happening to you that sort of sounds like or mimics what's about to happen that wakes you up. And it's almost like this incredible kind of dance between the conscious and the subconscious, or the unconscious mind. And I don't really know what dreams are there for. I don't know if if our mind's kind of playing while we're napping, or if they're there to help us process trauma, or all of the above. I don't know what they're there for, but I think they're there for a lot more than what we might have been led to believe, because I think they're sort of supernatural and incredible. What does a day look like for me? I mean, so I'm very particular and picky, and I wish I was one of these people. I wish I was like Stephen King, who could like write a novel while smashed and on cocaine, but like I'm the complete opposite of that. I need,
Have you ever tried?
No, maybe that's next. No, I definitely not. I need, a nice mug of tea and some ambient music playing, and for my dog to be asleep under my desk and things to be calm. And so usually I get up in the morning. I often try and get as much as I can done in the morning, because I find after lunch I often get that kind of fatigue, that kind of dip. And then I'll try and do something that takes me away from writing completely, like, yoga or gym or something very tactical. Often I find that the stuff I get stuck on comes to me when I'm not trying to write.
Yeah.
So, I try and interrupt it with other things. And then if I'm lucky, I'll get like another brief period in the evening where I can write. But sometimes I get nothing done whatsoever. It really depends on what's going on. But like if I'm having a good day, I'll get a solid amount done in the morning. If I was single and left to my own devices, I'd probably be nocturnal and have a very messed up sort of routine, because naturally, I love to write until sort of 2-3 in the morning. But I know for my mental health and everything else, I can't do that. So
yeah. I like that time of night to write as well. I find writing in the morning for me is really like, I still feel like I've got stuff to do, so I'm not really invested in the writing as much. But that midnight kind of, I'm on my own time, completely nothing else to do apart from write, then go to sleep. I think that's really good for me, and I could be a lot of people like that. Chris, I can't remember what your writing schedule's like. Whenever.
I don't really have one, to be honest. I just, at the minute, it's just whenever I can sort of fit it in.
Which you're doing well.
Sometimes I write. Yeah, sometimes I wake up in the morning and I can't get back to sleep, and it is like 3-4 o'clock, and I just keep writing. Because I write on my phone as well now, which is, it seems alien to some people, but I've got Scrivener on my phone, and I just draft in there, and then I might tweak stuff on my laptop and stuff later. But most of my writing's done on my phone, and it makes it so much more convenient and easy to just do that.
You'll be doing it using a dictaphone next.
I've tried that, believe it or not, and it's absolutely rubbish.
Anya says, I love dreams. Lucid dreaming is very fun, but only happens sometimes. They often inspire me. So yeah, some dreams are inspiring. Okay. One thing before we move on to talk about your latest book is, you mentioned working as an editor and having gone to writing academies, I guess that's what you can call it. What tips do you or have you taken from there? And especially maybe ones you wish you'd known at the very start of your writing career?
Yeah. I think so. If you are an editor trying to become a writer, your editing skills can paralyze you. So allowing yourself to write, like at least write a full chapter before you go back and start editing your own work, because otherwise you get stuck in the loop. I think that's a really, really important thing. I mean, it can make a huge difference. That's one of the reasons why it took me so long to write the novel, I think, is because I got stuck in this cycle of over editing. So I think that's probably the biggest thing is don't get stuck in that kind of paralysis mode. I'm trying to think what else. Also, learning to distinguish between when you're content editing and when you're copy editing. So I think copy editing, that's something you do much later in the process, because when you're constantly redrafting anyway, it becomes really pointless to worry too much about, the copy editing side of things, I think. So instead, focusing more on content and knowing when to begin each process, I think is probably the biggest thing.
Yeah, it's really kind of interesting, because I think what you mentioned there is that if you're over editing, and this can happen even if you're not an editor, I think that you're just stopping yourself so often that creative flow is just being halted. And I'm pretty sure there's a lot of authors, maybe Stephen King you referenced earlier, that just get the skeleton out first and then go back and draft and don't really edit so much until later on in the drafting process.
Yeah. So, and I think that's what, I think if you think about the two hemispheres of your brain, right, your left brain wants to keep everything very orderly and correct and nice and pretty and following the process, and your right brain wants to go like dance in the woods and do whatever the hell it feels like. And to get a good story out, you have to let the right side of your brain do that. You have to, if you're constantly interrupting creativity to make sure everything's kind of orderly and nice, it's sort of like interrupting a party and making everybody kind of wash the dishes, and yeah, so that's kind of the way and that's something that Suzanne Kingsbury talks about a lot, is allowing that to come out of you without kind of censoring yourself.
Nice. So again, just before we do move on, is the Suzanne Kingsbury course, is that something people can just apply for?
Yeah. I think if you just go to her website, it's called Gateless, but you can either do individual sessions with her, if you really just want one-on-one training, or you can sign up for a course, or you can go on retreats. I believe that's what she's offering.
We'll have to do one of those, Chris. If anyone watching or listens back to this and decides to contact Gateless and gets an appointment or anything like that, or gets advice, please get in touch and let us know. I'd love to know how that goes for you. Chris, any questions before we move on to the next round? We haven't played round one video, so it's not really a round, but there you go.
Yeah, I've got another twofold question. And these are a bit more personal, I suppose, so feel free to say I'm not answering those. But the first one is, when you're suffering from chronic illness, how did you navigate that? And how did you manage your mental health? And then the second one is, where do you think that quest for perfectionism came from?
Yeah, so the chronic illness, that was a result of being exposed to massive amounts of black mold and industrial chemicals. Wow. while living overseas, shall we say. And it often, anyone who's been through something like this, what happens is you end up being kind of sort of shopped around between sort of 10 different doctors who are all going to give you sort of nebulous answers that don't really help you. And you're going to be misdiagnosed and told that you have, fibromyalgia or ME or chronic fatigue. And no one's really going to know what's going on with you. And you're going to end up having to go down a lot of different avenues to find out what. So I think really the mental health thing is huge, because it's very easy to become incredibly despondent and depressed. And so I think the biggest thing is finding a network of people online or locally, if that's even possible, but that there are communities online of people who are going through the same thing. While I was going through it, it was really just sort of finding, forums and that kind of things where people were talking about things, but and not succumbing to the idea that it's all in your head, even when doctors tell you, I mean, I remember even when I had liver enzymes like through the roof, ridiculously high, and the craziest symptoms, I was told, well, you need to take antidepressants because you're depressed. And I was like, that is not, I know that's not what's going on with me, So, yeah, so I would say that, and don't be, what I did is I had to kind of juggle the temptation to try every single sort of therapy or remedy out there and stay rational about it and not blow vast amounts of time and money on things that may not work. So yeah, I was very, very lucky that I found help from an osteopathic clinic actually in Miami. That was an absolute miracle. But I know this is something people struggle with for decades sometimes. So I feel incredibly lucky that I made a recovery. So did I answer the question? No, that's the question.
I think you did in a roundabout way. I mean, obviously you're saying staying rational, and the mental health side, it's so difficult when you've got experts saying, or take this medication and that'll solve your ails, so to speak. So I suppose just a little expansion on that, and then we'll get back to the perfectionism element. I'm throwing really, really curveballs at you, and I'm sorry, but these is just coming up because of the interesting conversation.
No problem. So the perfectionism thing, I don't know where that comes from. I mean, yeah, I don't know. Probably some sort of dark, nefarious corner of my mind that needs healing. Who knows? You know what I mean? I mean, the root cause of perfectionism probably isn't good, but it's something that is both useful and very harmful. So you have to figure out when you allow it to come out and play.
So here's a question then. If you had to choose between the left side being, was the left side you said the more straight side?
Yeah, I think traditionally, they say that the left side, the left hemisphere of the brain is sort of your sort of rational mathematical mind, right?
So if you had to choose one or the other, so the more structured or the more free, which would you choose?
It depends in what capacity, like in writing or in
in life. In
life?
all areas of life. You really organize straight and to the point, or you're just wild and having fun.
I think to live life solely in your right hemisphere, you have to be some sort of creative genius, right? Like a musical genius or an artist or a writer whose work is so captivating that it doesn't matter how like loopy you get or disorganized you get, you've got money coming in that's going to keep you through, otherwise I think you're going to lose the ability to just keep your head straight and survive life, I think. But the idea of being solely in the left side seems just really sad and boring.
It does.
I think the balance of the two is really
that's where you get your Norman Bates characters, I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, that being said, I've met people who are very, very sort of left sphere dominant who are fascinating to me because they're sort of unraveling the universe through mathematics, and they can talk at length about it in a way that I could never hope to. So there's certainly fascinating. There's a fascinating side to that too.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, I'll play the video, even though we missed video number 1. This is part 2, which is What's the Story? And when we come back, hopefully you can give us the pitch for A Glimmer in the Hollows. I'm sure you can. Okay. And then we'll talk all about that.
Okay.
still dance to that. Okay, so could you let us know what A Glimmer in the Hollows is all about, please?
Well, really, so the main character, Jessica Page, she's a woman who's sort of haunted by fragmented memories of a night 20 years earlier in her life where her childhood friend, Olivia, disappears into the woods in the sort of eerie town of Driftwood. And so sort of fast forward 20 years, 2 feral children show up on her doorstep in the middle of the night during a thunderstorm. And this leads her to become entangled in this very dark, strange mystery that's closely tied to the town's folklore and mystery and legends. And basically her sort of hero's journey is her unraveling the truth behind this little girl's disappearance. And along the way, she develops a relationship with a writer who she has a long-term obsession with, who is also in town trying to sort of unravel the mysteries of Driftwood. So that's essentially it. Yeah.
I'm not sure what I'd do if 2 feral children knocked on my door in the middle of the night in a thunderstorm.
Especially if they looked as strange as they do in my book.
Yeah. Man, interesting. So that, as you spoke about earlier, kind of weaves into the sort of landscape in the mountains that you discussed and like a legend, I guess. So how did you adapt that from something that was real, or was it sort of local legends that you thought about and then created this?
There are certainly legends in Appalachia that have fascinated me and that influenced the book, not sort of directly, but that I pulled from. There's so many fascinating things. Like, I don't know if you've heard of the legend of the moon-eyed people, but they're like a race of very short people with sort of eerily pale skin and very bright eyes, who the Cherokee sort of spoke about. It's basically a Cherokee legend. And there's obviously, Mothman. There's so many different sort of cryptids and strange legends that come out of Appalachia that really more influence the atmosphere and the idea of the unknown, and of sort of strange people, strange creatures that sort of seem half real, half something else entirely. But I wouldn't say that they were directly based on any specific legend.
You mentioned atmospheric there, and it's been talked about being cinematically atmospheric. Spit that out. Is that something you were conscious about creating, and how do you approach making something that has a great atmosphere?
I think yes, absolutely, because that's something I've always I love to create, and I've always enjoyed in other writing. I'm trying to think. Well, really, I think it's about immersing people in a sort of sensory overload. So if you take a forest, it's about everything that's happening and everything that might be happening around you, and that you can see and that you can't see. But yeah, it's really about sort of drowning a reader in every possible sensation that might be going, without overwhelming them to the point that it simply becomes a sort of description of the setting. You sort of weave that in as you go along.
Yeah, that's one of the tricks, isn't it? Because it's about being immersive and descriptive without over describing and getting people lost. So is there a way that you balance that, or do you have tips on people who might be trying to write in that way?
I would say, I guess it comes down to the show versus tell things. So sort of don't write a whole paragraph. Well, if you do write a whole paragraph on, setting or something like that, keep it succinct and weave it in with the action, or show it through the mind of the character and what he or she is doing in that moment. And so it's a discovery through the eyes of the character, rather than this sort of descriptive sort of sentences about exactly what something looks like, and how that impedes or aids or influences whatever they're doing. It's it's the crunching of the twigs under her feet as she's running up a mountain, rather than the twigs were lying on the ground after a storm, sort of thing. You can blend both, but keep as much of it. If you want a fast plot-based sort of narrative, leave it as much into the action as possible, I would say.
Nice.
Yeah.
Lorna, we've not done this before, but I'm going to ask you, if you had to say to somebody, if you like this, then you'll like A Glimmer in the Hollows. And I know that's an awful thing to do, because obviously your book is uniquely original to you and everything else. But I'm talking about from a reader's point of view now. They're in a bookstore and they're thinking, oh, what should I pick up? What comparisons are you going to make?
Strangely enough, a lot of readers have said, they've compared it to Stranger Things, which I know is not a book, but that has come up again and again and again. I used to joke while I was writing it that it's sort of like Stranger Things, but just with grown-ups and making out.
That
sounds like it would do very well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think anybody who enjoys, maybe if you imagine Stephen King had a slightly more romantic heart about things, some people have said, one literary agent who read it said it reminded him of Gillian Flynn's Strange Sharp Objects, which is odd because it's a very different kind of a story. But maybe if you enjoy those kind of complex, disturbed characters who are trying to reconcile something in the past, then you might, there's a lot of that's in Gillian Flynn's writing for sure. But yeah, it's kind of tough to say because it's a blend of genres. If you enjoy the narrative style of a mystery or a thriller, but you also enjoy the kind of unknown of what sci-fi represents, and you don't mind those genres blending, then I think you might enjoy the book.
That was quite literally the question I was about to ask, because you're blending mystery, sci-fi, and even paranormal together. Why did you approach it in that sense? Was that something that you just felt was what you wanted to send out to your readers, or was there more to it than just your feeling for the book?
I feel I have read very little straight sci-fi. I enjoy some soft sci-fi, but I very rarely read the sci-fi genre, and I certainly wouldn't feel comfortable trying to write in the sci-fi genre. But there are a lot of tropes and sort of tricks of that genre that I enjoy employing and exploring. But I'm most comfortable with and most familiar with writing in the sort of mystery thriller genre. And really it's about the emotional core of the character and how the sci-fi elements are really about allowing the character to explore, like I said, the limits of what is real and what isn't, right? It's kind of a tool in that sense, whereas the mystery sort of genre it's very much the setup of, okay, something weird is going on in an eerie little town. What could it be? Let's start investigating. It's the setup is there, I guess.
There's a really popular book I'm thinking of, and it was made into a TV show, and it was kind of like a drama romance that turned into something completely mystery and a bit of sci-fi, and I can't remember what it was. It's doing my head in. But I was going to compare it in that sense, that was something that worked really well, and it was a massive curveball with that. Is this something that happens in your novel, or is it quite apparent throughout the story that there are elements of these genres from the start?
I think that it's very obvious that there's something spooky going on. But the feedback I've got is people were like, I had no idea it was going to end that way. So there's definitely an element of surprise. And I think, as I suspected, the feedback from that has been either, oh my God, I love it, or what? So I think, that's the challenge of writing in a sort of using multiple genres is you're going to have people who love the exploration and the experimentation of that, and people who are like, oh, I just really wanted to read a normal book.
I think that is going to happen with anything that's got a twist, and people are going to say yes or no to it.
Yeah,
regardless, it's going to happen to every author in the world. But yeah, did you know that twist was going to be there? Was that planned?
No, I didn't. All I had in my head is, okay, the idea of these sort of hauntingly beautiful but also terrifying strange children who sort of randomly appear out of the fog and the rain and stand in people's backyards, sort of unnerving them, and sort of pop up in the forest, and people don't know if they're sort of imagining it or buying into supernatural myth and legend, or if they're really seeing something real. But the reason why they were there took me a long time to arrive at.
Nice.
Yeah.
And it worked out well.
It did in the end, yeah.
Lorna, I like to ask another really difficult question, but this is kind of one that I've asked a few times. And it's, do you know what you're writing about when you're writing? And I'm going to touch a little bit on two things that you've said. You've talked about your characters reconciling something that's happened in their past, and also what is real and what isn't. So I'm wondering if that's coming from your own experience and is feeding into your writing, or if I could just be making that up.
I'm sure that there is a connection there, but digging it up from the depths of my brain might be tough to do in this interview.
Yeah.
I'm trying I'm sure. I think so. I think one thing that has probably informed that is I grew up in Edinburgh, and my sort of childhood experience was quite unusual, or sort of downright strange, I suppose you could say, because my father worked, he taught at a boarding school full of, very wealthy elite children, and that was a sort of its own universe. But I was sent to a very different kind of a school in the middle of Edinburgh, and to get there I had to take sort of 2 buses where again I was sort of plunged into a very, very kind of different world as well. So it was like I was always navigating multiple forms of reality. It was sort of like being what they call a third culture kid in your own country. And so even as a kid, I had this sort of sense that what people deem to be normal isn't necessarily normal for somebody else, right? And that everything that you take for granted might be radically different for somebody else. And you can apply that to everything from sort of expectations of how you live and spend every day to what you deem to be true. So I think in that sense, there's definitely a link there. But also I've always just been fascinated by the idea of conspiracy, of what might be real and what might not be, of the legends of things that may or may not have happened. I've always found that fascinating, and what causes people to believe 100% in one thing and entirely dismiss another, and what the roots of that are, I think, are fascinating.
Well answered. Difficult question there, Chris. Okay, we're going to move on to part 3 of the show, which is community questions. We've got a few minutes left to ask our staple questions, and any if you do have them. So please send them in now. And I'm going to play part 3 video, and we'll get straight into it. Okay, Lorna, if you could take any character from the world of fiction and, let's say, spend the day with them, or if you don't want to put it that way, you can put them into your novels. What character from the world of fiction would you take and why?
I think probably because of the similarity and the connections, I would take 11 from Stranger Things and put her into the sequel of my book, because I think I love her ability, her mix of absolute vulnerability and extraordinary abilities is a beautiful, potent mix that would blend beautifully into my book.
Yeah, lovely.
I've got another question I really want to ask. It's not a staple question, but it's just because in my own writing this week, I had a stumbling block because I was writing about friendship, and I realised that I only had about 5 actual friends. And I'm not saying that for sympathy, but I have a theory now that most adults have only a handful of friends. So my question is, how many friends do you have? And I'm not just going to ask you this. I'm going to ask every single person we interview from now on, just to see if my theory is right, because it's the only way I can tell.
God.
But yeah.
Probably around the same, actually, because I've spent my whole adult life jumping from one place to another. It's been incredibly hard to maintain close friendships. The friendships I do have are really old friendships from a time when my life was much more sort of consistent, living in the same place. What I have is lots of ghosts of friendships, the shell of a friendship, where if you would reach out to that person, they'd be like, "Oh, hi, how's it going?" But it's sort of faded in the meantime. Because I think it's pretty much, I mean, who can maintain that across continents, right? And I think the whole COVID just made that so much worse for people, the isolation. I think it's very, very normal to just have a handful of friends, for sure.
Yeah.
I'm glad I asked that, because it did reaffirm what I was thinking. And I think we'll get a similar response every week, because I don't think there's many people out there that have an abundance of friends. Like, unless you're a child, like my son has loads of friends, and the people I've spoken to, their children have loads of friends. But as an adult, I think it does get harder, because
writers often tend to be quite introverted. I mean, you have to be a bit of a weirdo to want to spend this much time by yourself, right? So that makes it even more challenging.
Yeah, I like spending time with people, but I also love spending time with myself. I think I'd say the same. I've done very similar. Lorna moved around a lot, had a lot of different jobs, and got those friendship ghosts. I think, like you said, that's a really good explanation of it. And probably quite right, Chris. There's, in terms of close friends that know you now, not years ago as well. That is a small group, and I think you're probably onto something there. Now, get on with the staple questions.
Yeah, just so if you could change the ending to any fiction, what would you change the ending to, and why?
So I think I'm thinking maybe what I'd love to see is if Eleanor in The Haunting of Hill House, Shirley Jackson's novel, if instead of sort of having this kind of tragic, ambiguous ending, if she sort of embraced the supernatural a little more and found the strength to unravel what was really going on in that house, or at least sort of become part of its legacy. I feel like that ending is both like brilliant, but also incredibly frustrating. So maybe that.
Nice, good answer.
Well, we've definitely if you've read the beginning, you've read the end.
Yeah.
Cyclical structure.
Yeah, exactly.
Brilliant. Yeah, I like it. We've got a question from Anya. I'll ask that. Where's it gone? 1 second. She said, if you had the chance to interview Mothman about a book, would you?
Oh my God, I'd be so terrified to do that. If it was behind like a glass screen, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Chris, if you could interview E.T. for a book, would you?
I would now. I think I've made my peace with E.T. But if you had to put me in a room with a few rats, no.
Oh yeah. Did you see the book I put on Twitter this week? It was my son sent me a picture of the rats, and I shared it, and I said it was down to your inspirational talk about how scared you were that he's read it, and he said it's blinking scary, and he's going to give it to me when they've finished. So I will soon be on to
nice.
that book. Yeah.
Love it. I love the fact that somebody's reading, but as you said, it's terrifying. So rats are a no-go for me. No, thank you.
So an interview with Mothman purely behind the glass.
Preferably, yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. What I'd like to know is that moving forward with your writing, obviously it's spanning many genres, and you've obviously got a liking for the, mentioned Haunting of House. No, hang on. Which one was it?
Haunting of Hill House.
The Haunting of Hill House.
Yeah. Okay, I was right. Those sorts of stories. So where do you think your writing's going to take you? And are you working on something that's already sort of determined on where that's going?
Yeah, I'm about halfway through my second book. I really, really wanted to write a sequel, I suppose, book number 2, to continue or sort of turn it into a trilogy, A Glimmer in the Hollows. But I also didn't want to get stuck in something that, I wanted to see what the response was like first. So, but I'm writing another book again, set in a spooky little town. This time also exploring the idea of a haunted house, but it's not really haunted in the traditional sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm definitely on book 2 now.
So do you think A Glimmer in the Hollows is kind of leaning towards something, because obviously this would get released at the start of November, at the end of October. Do you think that this could have been something that could have been captured in the October sales for like the horror elements or not?
My only concern with that is I think people who are looking for horror may be sort of they may not want the romance element that's in the book, and they may not find it horrifying enough. There's certainly parts of it that people have said feel like horror. There are sort of horrifying moments in the novel, finding yourself thrown down a massive pit underground is quite scary, right? But I wouldn't say it's traditionally horror, so I'm not sure if that would have been quite right.
Yeah. Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
And before we wrap up, where can we find all the good stuff? If somebody wanted to, I was going to say stalk you, that was a bit creepy. And then my second thought was creepy child appearing at your door. So yeah, if people wanted to find more information about you, where could they find that information?
So the easiest way to find me is I'm an LJ Selley on Instagram. I also have a website, lornaselley.com, but it's down for maintenance right now, but it should be up and running by the end of next week.
Nice. And obviously this comes out on the 1st of November. Is that universal, as in Britain and America, or just in America?
Yes, I believe that's for both.
Amazing. So what we'll do is we'll put the links to what we can find on you in the description for this for people to find, and we'll put the Gateless website in there as well. We discussed about earlier. So all I'd like to say for me, Lorna, is thank you very much. It's all good. Chris turned up on time afterwards. We got him to ask all those brilliant questions. So it's been great. It's been a good laugh, and thank you for sharing your story with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been great.
You're welcome. Anything from you, Chris?
No, just again, reiterate the thanks, and sorry if it felt a bit like a therapy session at times. Those were just the questions that came up in my mind today.
They're always the best conversations, right? They're the ones that matter.
So everyone that was watching, thank you for tuning in. People that are going to watch us back, thank you for doing so. And if you listen on the podcast, thank you. Drop us a little hello somewhere on socials. Let us know how you think of the show. And we'll see you all very soon. So from us, it's goodbye. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.